Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to do something a little different today, and I'm going to talk about headphones and IEMs, in-ear monitors. I'm no expert on this subject, but recently I've bought some stuff, and I suspect a lot of people who watch my stuff might be interested in this as well, so this isn't going to be any sort of review or anything like that. It's more just one guy's trip through audio over the past 3 months or so. So the last time that I bought significantly in this space was in about 2015, 2016. I bought these Sennheiser HDR 598s, which I chose for a number of reasons. First, they were relatively inexpensive at the time. I believe the list price was over $300, at least Canadian, but the often heavily discounted, and I bought these heavily discounted. These are very warm, but they are very pleasant with classical music or jazz or whatnot. Generally vocal forward, and yeah, they're good, right? But they're not what we would call neutral now. And then I was a fairly early convert to in-ear monitors, going right back to the era of the original iPod Nano, which I don't have anymore because they recalled them of battery overheating issues, and I have a later Nano. Sorry for the train in the background. The world's windows are all open. And so I ended up, with that I had some Sennheiser CX300s. I think they still make them. I had the original version. There's a version 2, which was even more bass heavy and I really didn't like very much. Then I went to some B&W C5s or something like that. Very heavy dynamic driver in-ear monitors, and I thought they sounded great, but they had attached cables and they eventually died. And then so I finally said, screw it. Shortly after I bought these, those died, and I bought a pair of Shure 215s, SE 215s. These are using a FiO Bluetooth cable from, I don't know, maybe 2018 or something like that. Anyway, still works. And these are warm, no top end, but I'm over 50, so, you know, how much does that matter, I suppose. But I like them well enough. These are extremely comfortable, and these are still my before bedtime favorites and will undoubtedly remain that. Okay, so this is where I was till about 3 months ago. And I've been interested in true wireless headphones, in-ear monitors, and I saw a really cheap price on these JBL Tune 130s, I think they are. These are a very basic true wireless in-ear monitor, but with some noise canceling. They're not super, but they're all right. They're very bass heavy, but fortunately JBL includes a quite useful application that lets you set the internal geographic equalizer to muck around, so you can tune them, you know, within limits more or less as you like. So I started playing around with equalizing things here. But what's clear is that what they were aiming for with this was very different from what anyone was aiming for in the mid-2010s or even farther back. It was much more bass heavy. I mean, these were extremely bass heavy until you get in with the equalizer. It was relatively cool though, so no warmth in the lower mids, which is, I mean, these things are extremely and these are moderately. And there's some oddness in the treble in these things, but generally, well, certainly more treble than these have, more high frequencies than these have. So I was interested, so I started poking around to see what was going on with in-ear monitors. And I learned that right around 2019, in 2018, 2019, we had a switch to trying to use what they call the Harman curve or similar kinds of curves. So in other words, the problem with headphones and the problem with in-ear monitors is that you've got to decide what they're supposed to sound like. I mean, there are problems with measuring them too, but even so, how they sound is essentially subjective because it depends on the ears of the person listening to it. With speakers in a room, once you make some assumptions about a room, you can decide, what speakers are supposed to sound. And even then, of course, speakers are tuned differently. B&W, for example, tends to make things really warm, which tends to be characteristic of what they call the British audio sound. Other manufacturers, American speakers in general, I'm talking back in the 80s and 90s at this point, would generally be thought to be tuned more neutrally, right? So they wouldn't have the elevated lower mid-range and upper bass that's characteristic of the warm sound. Anyway, and of course they make assumptions in all of this about what your room acoustics are because room acoustics are obviously going to drive the whole process as well. So by 2019, we had a series of Harman and other target curves, but the Harman one is what seems to have driven the industry, that was devised through listening tests, which was designed to find a target curve for headphones and another one for in-ear monitors. And it was quite different than the sound of this stuff. So that was interesting. So then I started playing around with a couple of things. First, I started playing around with the equalizer on these. And then I thought, okay, let's put an equalizer on these and see what you can do. And as long as you're not going too loud, there's lots of room with these and with an equalizer on a computer to equalize them to sound like that Harman curve, right? So to try to make them meet, as best you can, obviously, not going to be perfect, but to meet the kind of target curve that is in vogue today as opposed to what was, in style in 2010 or 2016 or whatever. So, and that was interesting because I liked it well enough. I liked the way these sound, but I liked them better, I think, with some equalization. And these were fun to play around. You'll never make these things perfect, but they were fun to play with. All right, so that was an interesting revelation. So then I started going out in the market, and then I said, okay, what can you buy now? I'll slide these away, and I'll show you where I've gone in the past little while. So we'll keep those because they represent the last 3 months or so in this business. Then I bought, these are Takim, I think, Tanya's. Now these are single driver, these are like 15 bucks, right? What was interesting about these is these were supposed to meet that Harman curve, right, for in-ear monitors, sort of. And certainly were thought fairly to, at the low end to do it. And I liked them. I mean, they're far from perfect, right? But I liked them well enough. So I thought, okay, let's try those. Again, total invested. These are obviously going to be great for riding a subway, maybe the office where you hardly want perfect sound. But these, it's always useful to have something that's not terrible that plugs in. All right, well, that's interesting. Now, I mentioned that the Harman curve is around, but there are a number of competing curves, and some of them are centered around a blogger, or a YouTuber that you guys probably know, or many of you probably know, called Critical. And so he was involved in producing these things, which are 55 bucks US, I believe. These are Truth Ear Zero Red, I guess. And these meet a slightly different curve. So I like those pretty well. They're still a little bassy, maybe a little warm, but these were quite nice. So it's like, okay, these new in-ear monitors are interesting. Maybe it's time to spend a little money, because what do we have total invested here? $120 Canadian, maybe a little more. Great, not a lot of money, but maybe we'll go with something a little bit better. And then I ended up with these, which are Moondrop Blessing 3s. Now these are pretty well the opposite of warm, so totally the opposite of the the SE215s. These are not warm. These have they're not terribly bassy, but they've got ridiculous low frequency response once you get down to it. And these are airy and, you know, provide some imaging as far as in-ear monitors go. They do pretty well. These are, in my view, really good, but I'm not an audio person in that regard, so I couldn't tell you exactly why or have the language to really describe it properly. But on these, I think, are probably where I'll stop. I do think I'll probably buy some new full-sized headphones at some point, but I think these are probably as good as I need in the in-ear monitor world. So we'll put everything back in. So where does that leave me now, right? Keeping in mind that I'm not going to be a headphone hobbyist, right? Collecting this stuff is of really marginal interest to me. I'm only going to buy stuff that I'm going to use. These were worth buying to try out some some useful sound signatures and, you know, secondary earphones to throw into a drawer, you know, by the bed and that sort of thing. And the JBLs, well, what they were bought for was commuting, and they will continue to be useful for that, and frankly sound perfectly adequate for that purpose. So the question is then, you know, where do you go in this? I mean, like, I think these are reasonably endgame for me in terms of in-ear monitors for the moment. I think these are pretty awesome. But the issue is then, you know, do you get new headphones and whatnot? And the thing is, what do you want, and what do you intend to use? The other options you can do is that you can, of course, look at Bluetooth adapters for something like that, or a larger one that could drive headphones. Maybe not that useful if you're driving them with your phone, which is already in your pocket anyway, but could be convenient around the desk, for example. So there's that sort of thing. So in other words, something like this, but of a little bit more recent vintage, and, you know, this does AAC, but it's fine with the Sures, but I have tried it. I have an adapters. I have tried it with the Moondrops, with the Blessing 3, and it's like, yeah, it's not really good enough to drive these. So what's the whole point of this little discussion? I look at my phone, and it's now been 13 minutes. If you've been out of the headphone market for a while, if you've had something you like, it might be worth dipping your toes in again. It might be worth picking up something and looking at how things has changed, because they've changed a lot since, you know, 2015 or so. There's a big change in how things are tuned, in what they can do, and the kinds of expectations people have around sound signature, dynamics, and all this sort of stuff that audiophiles talk about. This sort of Chinese-produced stuff here has really, I think, put a lot of pressure on the you know, the European and American manufacturers to play catch-up, and certainly Sennheiser has products here. I'm not quite sure where Shure is right now, because Shure dominated the in-ear monitor market, you know, from 2010 onward. You know, these things, I mean, you still see them all over the place because they're indestructible and, you know, really quite good for what they are. So, so we're in an interesting spot in this. It's actually, as I said, an interesting time to stick your toes in and see if there's something new that you like. I think the headphone market has also been shaken up a lot. The plain-ear headphones, these are dynamic, but plain-ear headphones of various sorts, and we see a re-rise of electrostatics, which reminds me of the 80s. And so we'll see what's going on, but you know, it's pretty fun. Anyhow, hope you enjoyed this little ramble about headphones and in-ear monitors. Lots of stuff to play with in there, and although I don't expect I'll be buying much, we might have a new set of headphones on the horizon in the next year or so. All right, thanks for watching.